Bethlehem Zoning Hearing Board. My name is Bill Fitzpatrick, and I'll serve as the chair for tonight's hearings. Other members on the board serving tonight from my left: Carol Ritter, Mr. Pete Schneck, Mr. Terry Novotnik, Linda Shea Gardner. To my immediate right is Eric Schock, who will serve as the board solicitor and offer legal advice to the board. To his right is the zoning officer for the city of Bethlehem, Greg Pfeiffer. And at the far right of the podium is Myra Evans, who will serve as the court stenographer for tonight's hearings. There is only one hearing that we'll be dealing with tonight. I would remind you that Myra Evans, our court stenographer, will swear in everyone who's either going to question or testify, and remind you that your testimony will be considered as sworn testimony and be included as a formal record of the proceedings. People in the audience wishing to question or to testify will be given an opportunity to do that, and it's probably easiest if I navigate you through that as we get to that point. But the way it's going to work initially is testimony will be introduced by the appellant, followed by questions from members of the board, and at that time, questions only from the members of the audience. After we've gone through all of the testimony from the appellant and the questions, we will then open up to the floor for any testimony that anyone might like to introduce. We do ask that you, members of the audience, avoid asking repetitive questions or making repetitive testimony. And lastly, I would remind anyone aggrieved by the decision of the board may appeal to either Lehigh or Northampton County within 30 days following the issuance of the written decision of the zoning hearing board. Mr. Schock, you had something you wanted to insert. Also, I would ask anyone who's going to speak tonight, we have sign-in sheets at the table right over here. I would ask you to please sign in. You want that done now? If you would, please. Attorney Schock, did you have any comments you wanted to introduce? Just this. Okay. Thank you. And at this time, I would ask members of the audience, anyone who's even thinking of asking a question or introducing testimony, is it please stand so that we can swear in all the witnesses.
Raise your right hand, please. You do swear by Almighty God, the searcher of all hearts, testimony which you shall give in the matter now before this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You do so swear?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Pfeiffer, would you read the facts of the case to us, please?
So parcel is located at 305.5 through 321 Van Buren Street. It's the appeal of James Bizwiski on behalf of Van Buren Development LLC for a use variance to construct a multifamily dwelling on consolidated Lot A and a two-family detached dwelling on consolidated Lot B, fronting onto an alley. Dimensional variances for Lot A include minimum lot area per dwelling unit. 2,500 square feet is required, 2,181 square feet is proposed. Minimum side yard setback, 15 feet is required, 10 feet 2 inches, and 11 feet 0 inches proposed. Maximum building coverage, 30% required, 44% proposed. To exceed the allowable area for off-street parking and driveway in the front yard, 50% permitted, plus minus 90% proposed. To reduce the minimum setback in a front yard between a driveway and a lot line of an abutting dwelling, 2 feet 6 inches required, 1 foot 6 inches, and 0 feet proposed. And to eliminate the minimum setback between off-street parking spaces in a multifamily dwelling, 15 feet required, 0 feet proposed. Dimensional variances for Lot B include minimum tract size, 6,000 square foot required, 4,340 square feet proposed. Minimum lot area per dwelling unit, 3,000 square feet required, 2,170 feet proposed. Minimum rear yard setback, 20 feet required, 9-foot proposed, and maximum building coverage, 35% required, 54% proposed. Variance is to permit off-street parking and garage doors to be placed between the front lot line along a street and the front wall of a new principal building, and to eliminate street trees. 6 are required, 0 proposed. Relevant sections include 1302.05, 1302.67, 1302.125, 1306.01A4, 1306.01 Note C, 1311.04B, 1311.04C, 1319.02G4, 1319.02M, 1322.03LL5I, 1325.06, and all associated variances, special exceptions, and interpretations. These parcels are located in the RT, or High Density Residential District. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pfeiffer. That's an awful, a lot of reading we asked you to do, but I think you got everything correct for us. Attorney Preston, can you tell us when the property was posted?
October 15th.
Okay.
Thank you.
So my first question just is, does the applicant concur that the relief in that notice that Mr. Pfeiffer just read is the relief that you need?
No.
Okay.
You want me to?
Yeah, I think we need to resolve that first, because it would be,
I think we do.
I think it would be helpful if the board knows what is applicable.
Sure. And let me do it this way. Let me just give you a brief history of how we got here, and then maybe it'll become a little clearer. My clients are trying to establish the project that's included in the zoning application. And the buildings, there's 2 types of buildings there. There's a row of townhouses, and then there's a set of twins. The defining characteristic of the buildings is that they are entirely separated by a firewall. So the twin is defined in the ordinance as 2 units on either side of a firewall that extends all the way up 2 units. If you have more than 2, then that same configuration is considered a townhouse. And when you get into the zoning ordinance, it says multifamily dwellings are buildings containing 3 or more dwelling units, but not townhouses. So if it's a townhouse, it cannot be a multifamily dwelling. Let's just hold that thought in the back of your head for a minute. We submitted our zoning application, which you should have, and we identified the relief that we thought we need. We had originally provided a plan, a drawing to the city. We couldn't get a timely zoning review, so we went ahead and put in the dimensional relief that we thought we would need. Regardless of whether it's a twin, a townhouse, or a multifamily dwelling, all of those uses are permitted in the RT zoning district. So regardless of how you resolve that issue, I'm not sure why we would need a use variance. But anyway, you'll see that we have listed in there the relief that we need. It's all dimensional, and it comes out of the table that you're all familiar with. Then what happens is we are told by the city that we need to take this to the planning commission. We're not sure why. There's a section in the zoning ordinance 1322 that says that you need to go to the planning commission for a site plan. You have to submit and have reviewed a site plan by the planning commission if your plan involves another section of this ordinance requiring city planning commission site plan review, of which there is none. Or 2, the project will involve a special exception application or use variance for a new principal non-residential or multifamily building, of which that's not applicable. The third one is the project will involve the addition of 10 or more off-street parking spaces. That's not applicable. The project will involve 10,000 square feet of greater or new principal non-residential building space, and that's not applicable. The only other one, the last one, says other projects that the planning bureau staff determine may have significant impacts upon an adjacent neighborhood. That seemed a little subjective. We resisted it somewhat, but we agreed that we would fill out the application, pay the fee, and go to the planning commission. And I think it was 3 days prior to that. Is that right? We got a zoning review letter. And that zoning review letter, that's not something that you have. I can make it available to you. We don't need to make it part of the record. But it reviewed this project as the project that we intended. Townhouses and twins, attached dwellings. The next day, getting closer to the planning commission meeting, we then got that 3-page planning review letter from the city. I believe it's over Darlene's signature, reviewing them as multifamily housing units. And that's not insignificant, because what that does is it brings you back into this section of 1322, which says a project involving multifamily housing. It also triggers a whole host of parking regulations that don't apply to the other types of housing. And that's where you see a lot of this relief in here. It's being generated by the city's contention that this is multifamily housing. If they're correct, then we did need to go to the planning commission. We took care of that. But we need all this additional relief. We don't think that's correct. And what you think what the testimony will show is that we meet the definition of townhouses and twins. That's what we are. The planning commission more or less agreed. It was agreed at the planning commission, and Lewis was there. He can testify to this, that in fact, it most likely was what we said it was. They couldn't really conduct a meaningful review because they didn't know which would apply. We all agreed that we would come to the zoning hearing board and get a determination as to what type of housing it is. But at the end of the day, the planning commission said, regardless of that, like the plan, they unanimously recommended that the board look favorably on the zoning request that we had made. They did say one thing, which is, you have Darlene's letter. They did say one thing, and I was there, I presented the application, is that they wanted us, when we came back, to reconsider how the parking was laid out. The ordinance currently requires 2 parking spaces per unit. We heard through the grapevine that the city is floating an ordinance that would require 3 per unit. So we thought, why not give them the 3 that they want? So we provided 3 off-street parking spaces per unit, and the planning commission wants the ability to look at that and structure it however they want. We said, no problem. Now, the letter that you got, October 14th, talks about this being reviewed at the planning commission meeting, and it says that at its October 10th, 2019 meeting, the planning commission voted unanimously to recommend to the zoning hearing board approval of the proposed land development with the inclusion of the comments and recommendations of the October 7th, 2019 letter from the planning commission. That just never happened. There's no way it could happen, because everybody knew that the recommendations, quite frank, didn't make any sense. And so we agreed to come here. I guess the threshold issue before we begin is, what are these? Are they multifamily units, or are they townhouses and twins? So I think, following up on what your solicitor said, I think that's where we need to start. And then this whole thing is going to reduce down to just a few dimensional variances. In any event, I see, if you look through here, it says the appeal of James Bashesky on behalf of, for a use variance to construct multifamily dwellings. Now, we can inquire as to the zoning officer, but I have the zoning ordinance here, and I looked at all the uses. Multifamilies are permitted in the RT zone, so I'm not sure why you would need that, unless the fact is that it fronts on an alley, but the zoning ordinance doesn't say multifamilies fronting on an alley is a permitted use. It just says multifamily. And it says twins, and well, it's the highest density residential district. So rest assured, everything's in there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Piper, can you comment?
Yeah, Attorney Preston brings up quite a few points that I'd like to just respond back to. Let's start with the last thing first, the use aspect of this appeal. This comes from it having a principal use fronting on an alley. That's referenced in our definition section. That would be the definition of a lot, the definition of an alley, and a definition of a street. Quite simply put, the ordinance prohibits any kind of principal use fronting on an alley, and specifically describes what an alley is, what its width is, and that a street should never be considered an alley, despite what its name may be. So that's where the use aspect comes from. The question of towns versus multifamily and twins versus two-family detached is a good question. And Attorney Preston is correct. My initial review of this was as towns and twins versus multifamily and two-family detached. However, in review with planning staff, other of my colleagues, it was determined that historically, if the properties were not subdivided, did not consist of separate lot lines, then they were considered multifamily or two-family detached. And subsequently, that's why the review was changed. And I would point out, interestingly enough, from my initial review to my subsequent and final review, the only change that has on the overall amount of relief that's needed is going from 10 feet from having a parking space adjacent to a dwelling to 15. The other items that have been mentioned about parking in the front yard and some of the other design requirements all fall under Chapter 1311. Those are design requirements for the RT district. So that would apply to any use, regardless of whether it was multifamily or townhouses, twins, or two-family detached. The applicants, as mentioned, did go before the Planning Commission. It was based on planning staff's recommendation and advisement. And the letter that you received from that is an advisory letter to you as the zoning hearing board. The comments therein recommend that the applicants reconsider the overall design, and in such reconsideration would be to reduce the overall amount of relief that would be necessary. However, based on what was submitted and having no further subsequent submissions that would alter the design, I wrote the legal ad based on the maximum amount of relief that would be needed as presented in the drawings in your packet.
Okay. All right. So, and both of you can answer on this one if need be. If the board were to determine that the Lot A contained towns and not a multifamily dwelling, would the potential use relief still be applicable because the principal use is not fronting on a street but an alley?
Correct.
Do you agree with that?
No,
Okay. Of course not.
well, I can tell you why. No,
I'm kidding.
I'll put it to you this way. It's in play because it's been advertised.
Sure. I just wanted, I want to know what we're actually considering, because I don't know if you're going to say, for another consideration is if you are proposing to modify the plan in any way that takes away comments from the Planning Commission,
Understood.
we would need to know that too,
Gotcha.
right?
The plan that you're looking at and we're going to present to you is the plan that was presented to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
We haven't made any changes to it.
Okay.
We don't intend to make any changes to it, except to the parking to the extent that the.
To the
Planning
one
Commission-
item you mentioned.
That they
Okay.
ask us to. But if you look at the definition of an alley, it says that it's a public or private right-of-way having a right-of-way width of less than 20 feet, that we would qualify, which affords a means of access to the rear or side of a budding property and is not intended for general traffic circulation. That's the definition of an alley. What the evidence is going to show is that this block and the adjoining blocks front the alley. This is where the general traffic circulation goes. The fronts of the buildings face the alley. There is no way to get to the rear because behind them are houses that face the other way onto a street. So what you're looking at is a neighborhood where one side faces out to that roadway. This side faces out to this roadway. It always, can't say always, but since the homes have been there, it has. And that's how you get there. So it is intended for general traffic circulation. It's not the case where you have homes fronting on a street and there's a little alley in the back where there's garages that people sometimes come up through the back. That's not what this is. So I don't know that it meets the definition, which says that it's not intended, which affords a public right-of-way having width of 20 feet, which affords a means of access to the rear or side abutting property. That's not true. It's the front. That's the front yard. And it's not intended for general traffic circulation. That's not true either. But we'll request a variance from that if we need to. I just don't
Right.
know that that applies.
I would echo that final statement. That's the point of a variance. If there's a hardship, here there's clearly a hardship. We don't disagree that the site is locked except fronting onto this alley.
Which section?
Advise them.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is put on your testimony,
Certainly.
okay? Make sure, though, that you address the relief you think you need, but also any other items that might be applicable if the board determines that you do need relief, whether it be use or something in the gray area
Understood.
with regard to that frontage issue on an alley.
You got
And
it.
then second, with regard to any parking requirement that might apply if you were a multifamily dwelling, and then we'll figure it out from there.
Okay,
Okay?
yeah, we can do that.
Okay,
You ready?
go ahead and proceed.
Okay, if I
Please.
can approach. Sure, we had 3 more.
Okay, thank you, sir.
The board likes those.
I'm not sure how that became an issue, but.
Uh-huh. I had nothing to do with you.
No.
Yeah.
So we'll let those work their way around.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
Just run down extras.
Are there extras?
Okay,
Here, why don't you take? Stand down a set, if you would, please. Thank
For another set?
you. Sure. It's 2,
One, three.
3. Didn't I give you a complete set?
I gave it to Craig.
Oh, okay.
A1.
Yeah, 1.
No, we got.
I think so. Yeah. See, 3 here. And this one here. Okay, these are extras. Okay, Attorney Preston, thanks.
are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'd like to call Louis Entile as my first witness. Louis, you've been sworn?
Yes.
State your name, spell your last name, please.
Louis Intile, Intile.
What's your connection to this application?
I am the owner, one of the owners of Van Buren Development and the developer of the site.
And does Van Buren Development own the property?
Yes,
You're the record owner,
yes,
not the equitable owner.
correct.
Okay, let's tell us a little bit about your company.
So our overarching company is Fifth Street Properties. We have purchased and renovated about 60 properties, single-family homes in South Bethlehem over the last 8 years, if you will. We have acquired this property to continue that. Primarily, we offer off-campus, high-quality off-campus student housing to Lehigh University, and have redeveloped on the south side for, as I said, about the last decade.
Okay, now Louis, I've handed up something. It's a packet that we've marked as A1, and it contains 6 numbered pages. Do you have a copy of that?
Yes.
With reference to that, why don't you just explain to the board a little further, a little more about your
So-
operations?
This is kind of an example which inspired the Van Buren development property, if you will. The 508 East 5th Street, was one of the first single-family blighted properties taken back by the city of Bethlehem under its blight initiative. They put out an RFP 4 qualified developers, of which Fifth Street Properties was one. And then they put out a second RFP for this particular redevelopment of the 508 East Fifth Street property. And I believe we were before the board with this as well. And what we did was we were able to remove a home that has been past its useful life with functionally obsolete and dangerous, and replace it with 2 brand new 5-bedroom, 3.5-bath townhouses to code to clean up that corner. Both students, the university, and members of the community and the city have all received this very well. And
Is this page 1?
This is page 1.
Yeah. Reference the exhibits if you don't
Sure.
mind.
So I'll just walk us through quickly. On page 2, you can see the blighted property that had existed in its previous state. It was a single-family home in that current state for about a decade. The redevelopment authority took it back, put out the request for proposals, and we were granted that. It was purchased in early 18, demolished, and construction was completed earlier this year, and they are occupied. On page 3 was just a picture of the demolition of the project of the property. Demo gets a little expensive in an urban environment because of the proximity to the neighboring houses, so it had to come down piece by piece. And you can see some elevations of the project. Page 4 shows on the left the existing condition of the front of the property and the rear. The bottom left corner, the rear roof had caved in. There was a dumpster's worth of garbage strewn about the yard. The mold was probably 1/8 of an inch thick on the walls inside. And we determined that the property needed to come down. And to the right is what the exact view looks like today. We have the new the duplex there with the townhouses, and the rear yard has been cleaned out, trees removed, and fresh grass painted. It's changed the look of the whole corner of East Fifth and Fillmore, and in keeping with the Blight Initiative's mission, if you will, is to continue to remove properties like this in the neighborhood that are a problem and replace them with something more functional. Page 5 is just a before and after of what the kitchen looked like on the left and what the kitchen looks like now. And one of the bedrooms, you can kind of see the roof had caved in. And page 6, you can also see some of the mold on the wall with the caved in roof. And now the property is all code compliant, interconnected smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. We've offered off-street parking, which is anybody who spends time on the south side knows that off-street parking is always a good thing. Central air, quartz countertops, appropriate installation. We've paved a good portion of the 500 block of East 5th Street following the construction and the utility improvements. And we repaired and repainted and the dilapidated sidewalk. So in seeing the success of this project, when acquiring the properties on Van Buren Street, although not completely blighted and caving in, they're not far off. And it led us to think that maybe replacing them with something new would be a good idea.
So you didn't just develop the property, you redeveloped it,
We redeveloped
as
it,
in you had
correct?
to remove what was already there.
You got it.
That adds to the cost of the project, does it not?
It does. Taking a house down that's only 3 feet from a neighboring house does get expensive.
Let's take a look now at Exhibit A2. Now, this is what's before the board this evening, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so A2 is here. It has, I believe there are 13 numbered pages. Take us through, give us a tour of A2 and tell us what's happening.
Sure. So first page is just the elevation of the row of 5 townhouses that is proposed for Lot A. And then I can walk you through on page 2. This is what the site looks like presently. On the left, you can see 305 and 307 Van Buren. And what you're looking at in the middle here is a construction site parking lot for a general contractor who previously operated their business in the residential district.
Let me just stop you there for a second. The vantage point of this photograph, am I standing in the alley?
You are standing in on Van Buren Street.
The street, but the thing that's been called an alley?
Correct.
Is that right? And behind the property, where the white van and the dumpster, is that the rear of the property?
That is.
And what's beyond that?
There are homes
The rear of those homes, and those in turn front on
on East 5th Street.
which is parallel to this
Van Buren, correct.
Van Buren. Okay, go ahead.
Page 3 shows another view of what had existed on the site. It was, as I said, it was a dumping ground and a storage facility for a general contractor. You can see the construction warehouse and workshop in the right of the frame of view. And this was their parking lot. You can see the backhoe there, work vehicles, etc. And then another page 4 is also looking slightly east, northeast on Van Buren. You can see the sign that has the Mazziotta Construction Workshop, where the vehicles would pull in for service, and they would store a lot of their construction materials as they did in the parking lot adjacent to the workshop. Page 5 is an aerial view of the entire block with the proposed land outline for this project outlined in red. To the lower left of that red box area, you'll see 305 and 307 Van Buren with the cars parked behind it. The center is the parking lot. At the time this aerial was taken, you can see a lot of the garbage and construction debris being stored in that back left corner. And then you can also see the Mazziotta Realty Holdings construction workshop and another small home, 321 Van Buren as well.
So there's a home in each of the lower corners, is that right?
Correct. Well, there's 2 homes on the lower left.
Mhm.
There's the commercial building, construction workshop, and another home there on the lower, on the right.
And from this photo, you can see the surrounding roads, is that correct?
Correct.
And the property that you have and the adjoining properties, their rear yards abut the rear yards of the properties out on Fifth Street. Is that
Correct. So all the homes that front on East Fifth Street have half the block lot, and they all front on East Fifth. So the only way to access these properties is from the Van Buren Street.
correct?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is there a paper alley at all through there? Or do the lots literally abut? In other words, so there's homes fronting on Fifth Street. There's Van Buren.
Correct.
It wouldn't be inconceivable that those lots could each back up to a paper alley that just people have subsumed, correct?
No.
There's no evidence of that, right?
No. In fact, if you look to
Mhm.
Polk Street, which is on the eastern side,
Yeah,
that has full coverage all along. So there's no way to drive through the home.
you
for
couldn't have
access.
gotten out.
No.
Gotcha. That's what it looked like to me, that there couldn't have even been anything
And on
back
the
there.
west side, which
Okay.
is Taylor Street, there's also a parking lot, but then there's also a home there as well, which also would prohibit you from driving down that paper alley.
Got it.
So it's just basically it jogs a little bit where the construction shop is, but there's no access to the site except from Van Buren Street.
And although it's not obvious here, Van Buren extends for more than just the frontage of this block, doesn't it continue down?
Correct. It continues to Webster Street.
Can I ask a question while we're still on this exhibit? If you go back to page 2.
Mhm.
And on the front left, you identified a property, I think it was 311 or something like that.
305 and 307 Van Buren Street,
Okay.
correct?
So that's their front. The front of that house is on Van Buren.
Correct.
So, all right, both of those.
Both of those, as is the commercial building, the construction workshop, and also the 321 Van Buren house. All of those structures we're looking to redevelop and remove and replace. They all front on Van Buren
On
presently,
Van Buren.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Attorney Gordon, I think if you look at page 5, the building that you're talking about is the building in the lower left-hand corner facing onto Van Buren, and you look behind it and you'll see cars parked. That's the building you're talking about.
Okay.
Then the Mazziotti construction is in the middle, but next to the Mazziotti, tucked down in the lower right-hand corner, that's another home, actually. It's sort of crammed up against.
And where does it front on?
Van Buren.
Van Buren, okay.
Yeah, everything along Van Buren fronts on, there's no way to escape.
Okay.
Through the back.
Thank you.
Except when you get to the corner,
Yes,
right?
when you wrap around the
When
corner.
you wrap
there's-
around the corner, they can front on
Polk and Taylor,
Polk and Taylor.
correct.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
next, how do those cars get behind 305, 307? Is that like a,
There's a small, where the left edge of the line is, that's outlining the site, there is a 10-foot or narrower driveway that drives into the back of the house there.
It's the same color as the paving under the cars. It's out near the front,
I think it's-
that
they come in
paved
this way.
area.
Wait, do they come in off Fifth Street?
They come in off of Van Buren. The access point is on Van Buren between 305 and 307 and the house that fronts on Taylor.
And it doesn't connect to the Fifth Street.
It does not. No. There is not one access point to, in fact, it's slightly elevated. So there's a little drop off there, but there's no access point to East Fifth Street. There's actually no access point to Taylor Street or Polk Street for that matter, unless you're in the corner properties as referenced earlier.
Okay to continue?
Yeah, go ahead and
Okay,
proceed.
go ahead.
So we have page 6 is just another view of the existing structures 305 and 307, showing the proximity to the power lines. And to the question earlier, the space between the greenhouse and the White House is a driveway that accesses those parking spaces behind the house. And then part of our design, we wanted to prevent driving between structures and shining lights behind into the rear of homes on East Fifth Street. That's why we decided to move the parking to the front of the structure to be more considerate. And that was feedback that we had gotten from neighbors. 7 just shows some of the reasons why we wish to remove these structures. 305 and 307 have very, very limited third floor egress, very low ceiling heights. The third floor of 321 is also, almost like a half floor. In fact, 321, we, as our company, would not allow tenants to live there. So we acquired that property and relocated those tenants because I guess under our brand, we don't want people living in those conditions. The house needs to come down. Page 8 is looking at the other the 321 Van Buren house and the other edge, on the edge of the commercial building. You can see 321 there. It's very progressive for its day. We watch all these shows on tiny homes, and they built one 100 years ahead of time. So you could almost pick it up and put it on a trailer.
And I noticed that I can see now down Van Buren Street. Is that correct?
You are correct.
And the blocks as you progress down, those are all fronting on Van Buren. Is that correct?
Correct. So cars accessed these properties in, I think, 5 different locations. There were 2 garages in the 311 Van Buren large gray building where cars could pull in and out. There was another in and out for the large parking lot when you pull back the second gate. And then the 5th driveway would be between the Taylor house and the 2 305, 307 Van Buren houses, as referenced earlier about how to get into the rear yard of those buildings. 9 just shows, why we are pushing really hard to redevelop these properties. You have major issues in the attic, roof leaks, 100-year-old wiring, functionally obsolete bedrooms that can barely hold a twin bed, low ceilings, outdated plumbing and HVAC, and that is the same that is shown on page 10 as well. The picture on the right I find interesting in the sense that the 2nd to 3rd floor staircase is so steep. The previous owner of the property installed a rope to assist residents to get to their bedroom on the 3rd floor. Yeah, so not exactly an ideal living condition.
Yeah, this one on a big board.
I do.
I'm gonna put that up while you go through it.
Sure, it's on the back of that one. Page 11 is just showing you access points to the properties on Van Buren. So if you look to the right, you'll see lot 20, 18, 17. Green is indicating that the only way to access any of those properties is through Van Buren. There is only one red dot on lot 8, which is a 2-car garage that services the property on East 5th Street. And then as you drive west on Van Buren, you can see there's a couple more garages, but a majority of the homes on the 200 and 300 block of Van Buren Street only have access from Van Buren Street. And there you can see usually in the tax maps, they'll show like a paper alley or something. That there's nothing of the sort. The lots just back up to the yards back up to each other. In contrast, knowing the South Side neighborhoods very well, on page 12, I picked what is Boyer Street Alley between Montclair and Burkle Avenue. And this is what I envision a true alley to be, where the houses front on Burkle Avenue and Montclair. And what you're referencing earlier was either a paper alley or an alley. Now, this one being a little bit smaller than Van Buren as well, that 100% of the homes are accessed, the rear of the properties are accessed from Burkle and Montclair by this alley. As the definition states, that it provides access from the rear or side of the abutting property. That's exactly what you're seeing here. And I just put that in a picture perspective on page 13. You can see the cartway of Boyer Street, where you drive between the two lots and park in the rear of the properties. We don't have that on Van Buren. The only access is from Van Buren Street.
Any questions before we move on? Questions from the board?
You're going to continue with this witness, though? Attorney?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
That this should be my only witness unless the wheels come off somewhere, I think.
No, work my way. We just
Okay.
continue on.
We're going to move to A3. Luce, you have a copy of A3?
I do.
And what we're going to do now is we're going to move to the property itself and talk about what is being proposed. Before we do that, just by way of summary, the intent is to take the area that was within the red lines that you showed us.
Correct.
On your exhibit. That's what you own, is that correct?
Correct.
Nothing beyond that?
Correct.
You're going to clean that out, remove everything.
Start from scratch because it's just not functional or salvageable in its current state.
Okay, and then you're going to replace it with what we're about to talk about, okay?
Correct.
Before we do that, I think the first page on A3, page 1, is an existing conditions plan, is that right?
Correct.
Why don't you go ahead and describe that to the board?
Sure. So as you can see, the lot lines, if we start all the way on the left on Taylor Street, those are two neighboring properties that actually front on Taylor Street. To the right of that, you'll see 305 and 307 mapped there, and that's the driveway that would access the parking into the rear yard of those properties. There's the large parking lot, which we saw from the aerial and earlier pictures that held a lot of construction debris and construction vehicles. Next to that is just as a side note too, so that would constitute Lot A, which is what we are looking to put remove all the structures there and put the 5 townhouses on that site. Lot B would be the rest of the area, which has the large commercial workshop and that quite progressive and well before its time tiny house at 321 Van Buren.
The two of those are Lot B, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Thank you.
And that we wanted to replace with the twins. The next page is what the proposal is. There are on Lot A would be 5 identical townhouses with a 1-car garage and 2 off-street parking spaces in front. As Attorney Preston alluded to earlier, the requirement in this zone is 2 off-street spots. However, there is a draft form of a ordinance that would be modifying in a student neighborhood the need for a 3rd parking space for each dwelling. So we had the space, we had the room, so we decided to get ahead of that and design it so that we would be able to accommodate 3 off-street spots. For the townhouses, given the shallow depth of the lot on the right, we decided to do a 2-car garage instead, and there would be no parking in front. There's just not enough room.
Can you answer the question of if you said the planning commission said consider just doing 2 spaces per townhome?
Not exactly. I think it
Oh.
was remove the 2. You remember what it was? It was remove the 2 end
It
ones? or
wasn't
something?
even a recommendation. It was a unanimous approval with careful consideration to rethink the layout of the parking. And we have had conversations with neighboring property owners about the potential of, the ones that flank on the outside We talked to our neighbors. One is here today on the west side. The one on the east is a doctor and works quite late in the evenings. But we had conversations with all of our neighbors to make sure that we are not disrupting anyone. And there was a recommendation to potentially remove one or two of those outside parking spaces, which we would be agreeable to. But
Were those intended to be the third space for the twins? Right, because you've got a garage and then 2 spaces in front of each of town. You only have 2 garage
correct.
on the twins, so that put it at a ratio of 3 on the
Correct.
twins.
Yes.
Okay.
The next page is just the floor plan and the elevation of the row of 5 townhouses. It's conceptual at this point. Should we get approval, we plan to meet with neighbors as well, and also have been having conversations with Lehigh University's architect and real estate department. This is a highly visible street. It's adjacent. It's right across Van Buren from the new Lehigh University Police Station. It's viewable from the Zollner Art Center. You can see it from Roush Business School. So when trying to change the whole look of that street, we did want to get input from Lehigh as well.
And let me just stop here a minute. I'm going to ask you a few questions about
Sure.
this, especially as it relates to the floor plan. So I see you have the first, second, and third floor plans. I assume they just overlay one on top of the other?
Correct.
And there are 5 units?
Correct.
And it looks like the units are separated by a heavy black line. Do you see that?
Correct.
Let me just get into the technicalities here a little bit. In the zoning ordinance, section 1302.39, a dwelling is defined as a building used as a residence. I assume these are buildings used as a residence.
Correct.
And if we look down under there, we see part B, it reads townhouse, paren, also known as a single-family attached dwelling or row house, close paren, a set of 3 or more attached dwelling units which are completely separated from each other by 1 or 2 vertical party walls. First of all, this is obviously a set of 3 or more attached dwelling units, is it not?
Correct.
Are they completely separated from each other by 1 or 2 vertical party walls?
Yes.
Let me call your attention now. We're going to go down to the bottom where it talks about multifamily dwelling or apartment. And there it says it's defined as a building including 3 or more dwelling units other than townhouses. You obviously have 3 or more dwelling units here, do you not?
Correct.
But these met the definition of townhouse, I believe.
Yes.
So do you have an opinion as to whether or not it would be a multifamily dwelling?
I believe that it is not a multifamily dwelling.
Okay. And let's deal with, oh, you didn't get to the twins
Well-
yet.
And the final page was just showing the parking, which in the access, which we discussed earlier as well.
Well, then let's deal with the second dwelling type you have here. And again, I'm still in 130239, which talks about dwellings. But now I'm going to drop down to part C, which is entitled Single Family Semi-Detached Dwelling, paren, also known as a twin dwelling, close paren. And that is one dwelling unit that is completely separated from a second dwelling unit by a vertical party wall. Is that the unit you intend to place in the, what would that be, the eastern part of
Correct.
the property?
Yes.
Does it meet that definition?
Yes.
And so it's, again, referencing multifamily dwelling. There's only 2 dwelling units there.
Correct.
So that can't be a building containing 3 or more, could it?
Correct.
Okay. Now, with respect to our zoning application, is it your belief that the uses are permitted in this zone?
Yes.
And if in fact the board finds that Van Buren is an alley, notwithstanding the fact that it's intended for traffic and it's the only means of egress to these properties, you would then be asking for a variance to that particular definition to allow you to continue to access Van Buren, is that correct?
Correct.
In the application that we originally submitted, we included a list of relief. I believe it was all dimensional relief, is that correct?
Correct.
You want to go down through those and explain to the board, perhaps with reference to your plan, what it is we're looking at?
Should I change? Is that the right word? Yeah. So as proposed, the Lot A side yard existing is about just a little shy of 10 feet, and we propose 11. The lot area per dwelling unit required for the townhouse is 2,200, and we have 2,181. The Lot A max building coverage. Let me grab the.
Take your time.
Sure. I'm not gonna get up to see it. So.
And you do have a table on there, is that correct?
I do. I just don't have the eyesight to see it. I believe it was, as required was 40 and we're seeking 44%. But in that we are taking Lot A, which has effectively 100% impervious coverage, back to about 64%. So in the design, by not putting parking in the rear and being able to approach the property from Van Buren Street with the parking and the garages, we're able to reduce the almost 100% impervious coverage back to 64 to allow for some grass buffers on the side and a yard as well.
I thought you said it was 44 where 40 was required. Is it 64 where 40 is
Excuse me, no,
required?
40 was required, we're seeking 44. The impervious coverage as existing was 100, effectively 100%.
And the impervious is down
and
to
the impervious
64.
is down to 64,
Gotcha. So,
correct.
so the building's to 44, the
44.
impervious is to 64.
Correct.
Got it.
Just a point of clarification, in the RT district, there is no maximum impervious coverage.
Okay.
For Lot B, the rear yard setback we are seeking is 9 feet versus 20 required. Currently, the shop sits at 7 feet from the neighboring property line, so we're asking for relief, but we're bringing the property up to 2 feet.
Further into compliance.
Further into compliance by 2 feet. The reason for that is if you look back at the red outline, the lots from East 5th Street jog a little bit towards Van Buren a little bit for that little area. So we weren't able to recess the property and have parking in the front. So what we did was we justified that forward a little bit and allowed for a 2-car garage. And then the remaining dimensional variances we were seeking, Lot B minimum tract size is 4,340 versus 6,000 required. Lot area per dwelling unit of 2,170 versus 3,000. And the Lot B max building coverage, 35 required. We're seeking 54, down from currently at 61%.
All right. Can you give me that last number again? The building
Sure.
proposed?
So max building coverage on Lot B proposed is 54%. Required is 35%. Existing is 61%. So we're bringing it into compliance by 7% more.
Are there questions from members of the board with regard to the original application?
I have a question about the correspondence from October 7th.
Sure.
And paragraph 3, the key points.
Mhm.
So were they suggesting that you move your parking all the way around to the back so that you would have like a one-way loop?
Correct.
Okay. And you haven't changed your proposal in line with that consideration, right?
We have not.
And Attorney Gardner, the planning commission did not indicate that we should be doing that.
Yeah.
It was a recommendation, but
there's some consideration given to those existing families back there. They didn't,
Right. Well, I heard the part about the lights and, and that kind of thing. And, I don't know, it just seemed like an accident waiting to happen. So taking cars around those buildings, but okay.
The intent was also to take, as you saw, what was a kind of a commercial construction dumping ground and make it fit back in with the residential neighborhood. So by front justifying them, it allowed to have some, a shared yard with some grass, some side yards
Right.
with grass, and make it look like it was part of a residential neighborhood again.
Great, thank you.
If we had parking in the rear, you would be back at that 100% impervious coverage, and yes, an accident waiting to happen.
Got it, thank you.
You're asking for relief of square footage. Is there a reason why it has to be 5 units? I mean, does the project not work if it's 4?
Given, we've learned a lot getting back to this 506, 508 project that we've just completed as part of the city's blight initiative. We learned a lot about the cost of the demolition and the cost of construction, and the financial feasibility of 4 is just, it's not possible. The 5th unit allows the project to be much more financially feasible. Our intent is not to just slap up, kind of, in all honesty, not slap up something cheap. We want to make it look nice architecturally. We want to make it look, fit in with the fabric of the neighborhood, something to be proud of. And, at 4 units, it kind of doesn't work.
Any other questions from members of the board?
Just a couple.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Attorney Shaw.
Am I correct that on the 5, that we'll call them the towns, you're a total of 95 square feet short, right? Because did I hear correctly? 2181. So
We're
that's 19.
16. Yeah, so it's 2181 proposed and 2200 required.
So that's 19 square feet.
Yeah, sorry,
per-
19. Yes, I'm sorry.
So times 5 is that 90? So it's just 95
Yes.
square feet on all
Sorry.
5 of
Yes.
those. It's really the other one, lot B, where you have the big discrepancy.
Correct.
Okay. And then secondly, is there on-street parking allowed on Van Buren in front of the existing properties?
No.
Because the road is too narrow?
No, it's just, there are, yeah,
There are
I mean,
signs.
yeah,
Is it-
you're not allowed to park there.
Okay. On Fifth Street, it looks like on your aerial, there are cars. So is that on street? I'm going to guess there's not 8 people who are illegally parked on Fifth Street. I
Correct.
hope that's the case.
Correct.
So is it allowed on East Fifth Street?
Parking?
Parking, on street parking in
Yes.
front of all their homes?
Correct.
Okay.
That's kind of where, if you look to the design of the lot B, as you alluded to earlier, because of the depth of that portion of the lot, we were not able to allow the parking in front of the property, and therefore to comply with the parking requirement, we had to put a 2-car garage in, which increased the coverage of the home, but we had nowhere else to put the parking.
How big is the parking area that's in the home?
The 2-car garage?
Yeah. Is that on those designs somewhere?
It is. I don't know if I have that with me. Let me check. I do not have the actual size of the 2-car garage. Say it's. See something.
Do you know what a typical garage is?
Yeah, I would say it would be probably 20 feet deep by, 10 wide. Each,
That would
so
be
20
one.
by 20,
So-
yeah,
so
or
four-
400.
Or 400?
Yeah.
Anything else, Attorney Shaw?
I just have one other thing. So you look at that twin, the gray area, you're saying, is just too short to park a car before you hit the street right of way.
You are correct.
Okay,
Yes.
got it.
Maybe a smart car or something.
Smart,
About
yeah,
it.
maybe, or yeah.
Yeah, and
Explain.
you see how the property jogs from East Fifth Street. So we were not able to set it as far back and allow the parking, for example, like on Lot A. So the only place to satisfy the requirement was to have a larger 2-car garage there.
And that rear yard, even where you put it, is still deficient. It's improved, but still deficient.
Correct.
So you have no space. So you would have been,
If you start moving B closer to Van Buren,
Yeah.
then it's not as comfortable as a turning radius, and it's you're
okay, so to pull into my garage, it would be, you're saying you thought it was too tight to make the turn off Van Buren.
correct.
If you shifted it, because theoretically, right, you
Site.
could have eliminated more of that gray. That's what I'm wondering.
Mhm.
What's the driveway essentially, right?
It'll-
It allows the driver to
Site
get out of the
compliance, yeah.
garage and see what's on the street
Gotcha.
before the back of the car's on the street.
All right.
Yeah.
So the driveway length is almost fixed to have safe access onto
Correct.
Van Buren.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
driver can see what's out there before they get out there.
And Van Buren is relatively narrow street. Am I correct?
It's a 20-foot right of way.
It is.
Yes.
Attorney Preston, any additional testimony?
I'm gonna look here. And Louis, you're familiar with the notice of the hearing
Yes.
this evening? And I believe there are some, at least one I'm aware of. I was sitting here trying to follow Attorney Schock's instruction and come through these. I see that there's one that talks about parking for I'm not sure because they don't list the numbers in the body of the text here. I was able to find one that talks about separating parking. This is 13.
Well, I can tell you the first one that when I was reading through and comparing was the advertisement says minimum setback in a front yard between a driveway and the lot line of an abutting dwelling. And I don't think you had that in your list.
That's right, we did not.
Okay, so I guess my question would be for the zoning officer, does that apply irrespective of whether this is multifamily or a townhome?
Correct.
Okay, so then we need that one addressed irrespective.
We would just call out those that are specific to multifamily. I don't
Yeah,
know.
but I guess if that one applies either way, you didn't ask for that. The zoning officer says you need it, and you didn't testify why you can't meet that one. I think that we just need an answer as to why you can't meet that separation.
That's it.
And maybe it's helpful, Mr. Piper, could you just point out on their plan where you think where the city thought there was that deficiency?
Certainly, that would be on the lower left-hand corner with a single spot.
So it's the single spot that the planning commission was discussing with them.
That would be the one that they.
All right. Okay.
So if that wasn't designated as parking, it would be,
If it was 2.5 feet away from the lot line, it would be compliant.
But if they couldn't move that over and still put the parking space there, the answer would be you could eliminate that parking space because it's not required under the code. They have too much not too much, but they have excess. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then the next one references the multifamily dwelling. So I think that only applies if the board found this to be a multifamily dwelling, and that would be to eliminate the minimum setback between off-street parking spaces in a multifamily dwelling. Okay. I mean, you can't build, I guess is the question, could you build them with a 15-foot separation?
No, we You're
No.
a witness.
No,
So that would eliminate all of that off-street parking that you've got along Van Buren.
correct.
All right.
Just a point of clarification, that requirement is also reflected in the design standards under 1311. The parking in front of a principal building in the lot line.
But that one is the 15-foot separation between the building and the parking spaces. If that was, are you saying that one applies irrespective of whether it's multifamily or townhomes?
So there's two parts to 1322.03 LL5 little I. Part one is the 15-foot separation. If the board were to consider these townhouses,
Mhm.
then we would reference another section that makes that 15 feet go to 10 feet.
Okay.
And that would be 1322.03 ZZ2. So it would be one or the other. The second part of the initial question was parking in front of a principal building in the front lot line. That's reflected in the section addressing multifamily dwellings as well as the design standards for the RT district.
So that one applies irrespective.
Correct.
Okay. Can you I guess I'm the one. I guess I just have one question. So the one where you need a 10-foot separation between a townhome and its off-street parking space. If you put a garage, how do you achieve that? What does that look like? Because it would seem to me the off-street parking is the driveway, right?
I read that it doesn't apply. Just, oh, that's in the IR, or never mind.
I don't understand your question.
In other words, if I have a townhome and I have a garage, and then you said the distance between the off-street parking space and
That's excluded.
that's excluded.
Correct.
Okay. So the issue would be they couldn't count that as their parking space because it would be their driveway.
In the scenario where you're parking in front of the driveway,
Yeah.
that would be permitted. Can I say it that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
And does it count as your off-street
It
requirement?
can count as an off-street parking space. Correct.
Oh, okay.
The driveway.
Correct.
Okay.
As long as the driveway is approximately 9 feet by 18 feet, which is your standard parking stall, and it meets the setback from the right of way based on what the city engineer requires, you can include that as a parking space. So I think relevant to that would be Lot B, where clearly that depth is not enough to fit a car unless it's, as somebody else pointed out, a tiny car.
On the other lots, though, if you didn't consider that off-street parking and considered it parking in the driveway where you have a garage, would those spaces comply?
Craig, is the only reason why these don't comply because this building has this little wing here?
Hold on, I got two questions.
Okay. Well, I think
Yeah,
it might
let's-
answer
let's-
Eric's
Let him finish
question.
one, Pete. Please.
The first question was, and correct me if I'm going to repeat this, not the way you intended,
Yeah.
but can they park in front of the garage?
And have it count as a required off-street parking
So,
space?
so where this becomes a challenge is back to the design standards in 1311.04 little b, where it talks about off-street parking and garage doors shall be located to the rear or side of the principal building as opposed to being newly placed between the front lot line and the street.
That's why that one makes sense, because it's never envisioned that the garage door's in front.
Correct.
Okay, now I can understand where that's coming from, because it wouldn't make sense if you had your garage in the front that you couldn't count your driveway.
Okay, Mr. Schneck, your question. I'm sorry to cut you off before.
Oh no, I thought it might have answered this little wing that comes down. Is that why that parking is not permitted? Or is
Yeah, he's talking about the two spaces that don't front in front of garages, that wing and that wing.
is the only reason why they're not in compliance? They're directly next to a structure.
That's yes for both of them. And then in addition to that, for the one in the lower left-hand corner, it's that 2.5 foot setback from the property line.
Okay.
You need anything additional? for-
Nope, they've answered all, between the two of them, three of them, they've answered all my questions. Thank you.
Attorney Preston, did you have any additional testimony?
Just give me a minute.
Yes, sir.
So, okay, I think I get that. Because to me, it seemed like you could have 10 if you. But the issue is the garage is supposed to be side or back, yeah. So your driveway to the garage would not be in the front. Yeah, yes, that's not. Right. So if you don't have all street parking. Like,
So they just cut off the easement.
Six, do not, yeah, just to afford this.
but you'd still need the garage up front, unless you accepted the fact that they should drive around, which I don't.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay. So, the exhibits are accepted.
All right, one last go around. Any final questions from members of the board?
Just for my clarification, you're not considering any of the recommendations from the planning because you're not considering this as a multi-family dwelling.
I can answer that. No, they're not multifamily dwellings. That's up to the board to decide that, but I read the definitions. I'm sure you have them there. Your solicitor can.
But
advise.
that's why you're not considering these recommendations, or are you considering any of these recommendations from the city on October the 7th?
Give me that letter.
I think that and if I'm correct, almost all of the other ones are really the issue of the parking in the garage in front. That's a lot of the comments,
Ostensibly, yes.
ostensibly, yeah. Which comes back to they don't have access and the alley is their position.
No, I don't think so. I don't know that they're all recommendations. What we've done is we've gone to the planning commission and had the planning commission review it, give us their take on it. And their issue was the parking, which could result in the elimination of that lower left-hand parking spot, which would address one of the variances. But other than that, I don't see the need to do that. I don't think the planning commission did either, to be honest with you.
Mr. Schneck, anything else? No? Anyone else on the board? Anyone from the audience wishing to ask a question? Sir, identify yourself and tell us your address, please.
My name is Charles Scott Barheit, and our address is 514 Taylor Street.
And if you'd speak into the microphone, I'd appreciate it. Thank
Can
you.
I go over to the podium? Like
Yes, you can. Sure.
Could you spell your last name for me, please?
Sure. B-A-R-H-I-G-H-T.
Again, Mr. Barheit, this would be questions of the testimony you just heard.
Well, I had a question. But can we make comments then?
Not right now. We'll have that
Well,
later.
now I just have one question about the testimony. Louis, you said that the current building was 10 feet from the property line and that you were going to put your building 11 feet from the property line from 514 Taylor to where your new building would be?
Correct.
James met me over there the other day. We measured that and I don't think you're correct in that statement.
Okay.
Because if we use the line that James gave us as the line.
Sir, this has to be questions only. That you're getting into the testimony part of what you would introduce.
Well, then I'll do that when you let me. back up
If you
again.
would, I'd just like to dispense with any questions we have and then we'll welcome
Well,
you back up.
I'm just trying to clarify, are you sure that existing building is 10 feet away from the property line? Is my question then.
That's fine.
I believe so.
This is the James that he was referring. Okay. This is the other half of the ownership of the property.
Any reason why we couldn't shift this down and ask for variance from their own side yard and give him more room? Okay. Yeah, right, yeah. They could make a little bit. Could do. Although I don't have much issue with them. Square feet, they're short, but a dwelling. Right. But if they got rid of this, still enough parking. They could shift it. What would their side yard setback be here?
End of
Do you understand this issue?
You own the fall off.
So what's required over here, 4 feet? So they could
My
get
question's
6
been
feet.
answered adequately. Thank
It
you.
has, thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the audience? Seeing none, I would now welcome any testimony or statements from members of the audience. If you would, sir. Again.
Can I borrow one of your exhibits? Borrow one of your exhibits, do you mind? First of all, I've known James for
Out front.
probably 15 years over at Lehigh. Here's what I'm looking for. And I don't know Lewis as well, but I've worked with these guys for a long time, and I have a great deal of respect for them. And they came out and met with me and talked to me, and I need to tell you what our concerns are. We own-
Sir, can you just hold on for just one moment? I'm going to hand you a microphone to talk into. Otherwise, no one can pick it up on the live stream and some other places in the back.
Oh,
Can we use the cordless one on the table over here, Craig, or?
all right.
Dang, that's good.
I just wanted to point to that.
Yeah.
I used to be a school teacher, so you guys might be here a long time once I get rolling, it'll be good.
Maybe I should have skipped class, huh?
Anyway, we own 514 Taylor Street. And the property line, the distance between the back of the property and their property line, I believe is about 2 feet then, Louis, we figure, okay? And so our concern was our home here has been hit 3 times by students driving into this driveway that exists. They keep hitting the side of the building. And this building that is currently exists here has been hit also multiple times. So our concern with this is it was not the variance for where their building is, but the variance for where the parking, when they wanted to move the parking where there's 0 space between the parking and our boundary line. Now what you're going to do is our house will continue to get hit even more on a regular basis. There just isn't room to pull in there adequately and park. Now, James and Lewis, and I don't want to speak for them, suggested that maybe this could be removed, and we would be very amenable to that if that happens, and then we would have no questions about the project at all. And so that was really our major concern, is that having our building continually hit by cars.
And what are you asking them to remove?
I'm asking them to remove this parking space here,
Oh, okay.
so that this would simply be a grass area out to here with a curb, so that people couldn't, because if there's not a curb, the students will pull up over there anyway. I mean, students park wherever they can. I mean, that's just the nature of those places. We've been there since 1984, so. Okay, I think that was it. Deb, did you have?
Attorney Preston, did you have any questions of the?
No, I do not. I would just point out that that's one of the reasons why we eliminated the roundabout and the rear parking. But we don't have an objection to that.
Okay. Anyone else from the audience wishing to testify? Seeing none, any closing statements, Attorney Preston?
I have none. I think the board probably heard enough.
All right, Meyer, we're going to go off the record. I would remind everybody with the live streaming that continues even while we're out of the chambers, so.
Moreover, the microphones stay live.
I think we can just go back in the hallway here. Sorry, I got
Go ahead.
the boxed in here. There.
I'll give it to you. A whole bunch of them sitting over here. Just copy paste. And that was, of course, before we had Elvis on the street.
What's their name? You can take a look at it. You have it. I gave you that packet. No, but go ahead. You can.
taking questions. Hi, I'm Sharon from the Bethlehem Press. I just was wondering, so you're putting up apartments? Townhouse, so they're going to be sold?
They're going to be rentals.
Oh, rentals.
100%.
Okay, do you have any ballpark estimate? Thanks. Happy. You know that's the signal. Sun to go down.
Yes, sir. We're deliberating. Which probably. That should help with that.
Spot on, Jesse.
I wouldn't use that. This is great.
Yeah. Chicken dinner.
Quick question for you. Whoa. When did it cancel? Oh, no. Okay, I mean, it's- Like my bosses didn't tell me. But this is interesting. Bigger deal. Sparse in here. Well, I mean. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. They got a B in there. I guess it's. Here for the finale on that. I said, listen, stay alive longer now. What's that?
She knows about this. She knows about it. I was worried about a Sandy Mill thing on the down. She made it the day after. She was calling. Remember you know it if you don't. I can't make it.
Yep.
All right, Maura, you'd like to go back on the record, please? May we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, that based on the upon the facts presented to us, that the use variance is not required and the use of Lot A is considered townhomes.
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Pfeiffer, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Schneck,
Yes.
Mr. Novatnik,
Yes.
Ms. Ritter,
Yes.
Ms. Gardner,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Chairman, a motion to deny the variance relief for the two FAR parking stalls indicated on the plan.
Second.
As pertains to, was it unique to one of the lots?
Lot A.
Thank you.
And there was a condition.
I think you can put the
We're-
conditions on the last.
And the
one.
last one.
Yeah.
Okay. all right.
Second.
Ms. Ritter,
Yes.
Mr. Schneck,
Yes.
Mr. Novatnik,
Yes.
Ms. Gardner,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to make the motion to grant the remaining variance relief necessary for the project as proposed, subject to the condition that the driveways have curbing from the structure to the street and a fence be installed to eliminate access around the building, subject to Planning Commission review and approval.
Second.
Ms. Ritter,
Yes.
Mr. Schneck,
Yes.
Mr. Novatnik,
Yes.
Ms. Gardner,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
Yeah, to clarify for the applicant, so on Lot A, you did not get the relief for the spaces at the far end. And the board's conditions would be that, as the neighbor mentioned, if you could put curbing from the street just on those outside driveways, so you can't pop up, and then a fence so that people can't drive around the rear, which I think was consistent with you not wanting to park around the rear.
Or even a tree or something like
Tree,
that.
some barrier. Yeah.
Some type of barrier. Okay.
Barrier, correct, because that's what they thought, that's a safety issue that we thought was legit, that the board thought was legitimate.
Can you amend the motion to say, we might put a bollard or something?
Yeah,
as
well,
opposed to a fence?
Mr. Steck, would you amend it?
We understand the purpose
A
of your,
barrier, it's up to the board, is a barrier sufficient?
I would suggest we do that. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Do you need a vote from the board or just accept that as a clarification?
we'll accept as a
If
clarification,
you would, please, yeah.
fence or other
thank you,
barrier.
appreciate it, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, thank you. Having no other business before the board tonight, this meeting is adjourned.